Imagine growing up alongside a brother, sharing moments, challenges, and promises, and in the end watching him become your worst enemy. This is what happened with Esau and Jacob. Two brothers, two destinies, two rival nations. While Jacob became the father of Israel, Esau gave rise to the Edomites, a people marked by resentment, strength, and relentless enmity against their own relatives. But why did the Edomites hate Israel so much? What happened throughout history to turn brothers into mortal enemies? In this video, you will discover how this rivalry shaped centuries of conflicts and astonishing prophecies about the fate of Edom. The story of the Edomites begins with two brothers whose conflict started even in their mother's womb. Isaac and Rebekah were chosen by God to continue Abraham's lineage, but even before their children were born, something unusual happened. Rebekah felt the babies moving incessantly, as if they were fighting inside her. Intrigued and worried, she sought God to understand what was happening. The Lord revealed to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Genesis 25:23. When the day of birth arrived, the prophecy began to be fulfilled. The first to be born was Esau, a red-haired boy covered in hair, a striking sign of his rough and wild nature. Right after him came Jacob, holding onto his brother's heel as if trying to stop him from coming out first. This moment symbolized the struggle that would follow them throughout their lives. Esau grew up to be a strong and fearless man, accustomed to life outdoors. He spent his days hunting and exploring the fields and forests, ensuring food for his family. His father, Isaac, had great admiration for him because Esau represented strength, courage, and practical skills. However, Esau did not concern himself with spiritual matters. To him, God's promises were distant and held no real value for his life. Jacob, on the other hand, was more reserved and observant. He preferred to stay at home close to his mother, helping with tasks and taking care of the flocks. While Esau relied on his physical strength, Jacob used intelligence and strategy to achieve his goals. Unlike his brother, he deeply valued God's promises and knew that the blessing God had given to Abraham was something precious. However, Jacob did not want to wait patiently until it was his turn to receive this blessing. He desired it with all his heart and was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that destiny would be fulfilled in his favor. Everything happened on what seemed to be an ordinary day. Esau was returning home after a long hunt. His body was exhausted, his stomach was growling, and his patience was wearing thin. Upon entering, he was surprised by an irresistible aroma. Jacob had prepared a steaming and appetizing lentil stew. Without a second thought, Esau said, "Jacob, give me some of that stew. I am starving, almost dying of hunger." Jacob saw the perfect opportunity. He knew that Esau did not value his birthright, so he made a bold proposal. "I will give you the stew, but only if you trade me your right as the firstborn." Esau, impatient and overcome by hunger, did not think about the consequences. To him, a plate of food at that moment was worth more than a future blessing. Without hesitation, he agreed and made an oath, selling his birthright for a simple stew. Little did he know that this choice would come at a high price. Esau despised an eternal blessing in exchange for something temporary, and this decision would have consequences not only for him, but also for his descendants. Many years passed, and Isaac, already elderly and with weakened vision, felt that it was time to grant the special blessing to his eldest son. Calling Esau, he said, "My son, go hunt and prepare a delicious meal for me. After eating, I will give you my blessing." However, Rebekah overheard the conversation. Since she had always had a special affection for Jacob, she decided to act quickly, to ensure that the blessing would go to him. She took Esau's clothes and dressed Jacob in them. To prevent Isaac from suspecting, she covered her son's hands and neck with goat skins, imitating Esau's hairy skin. She prepared a delicious dish and handed everything to Jacob. Disguised, Jacob entered his father's tent and said, "Father, it is me, Esau. Eat what I have prepared and grant me your blessing." Isaac felt a sense of strangeness upon hearing Jacob's voice. Something did not seem right. To clear his doubt, he reached out his hands and touched his son. He felt the roughness of the hair on his skin and murmured, "The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's." Even though he was suspicious, Isaac ended up being deceived. Convinced by the touch and the smell of the clothes, he granted the blessing to Jacob, believing he was blessing his eldest son. A short time later, Esau returned from the hunt, full of expectation to receive his father's blessing. But upon discovering that Jacob had taken his place, he was devastated. His pain turned into despair, and with tears in his eyes he pleaded, "Father, do you not have any blessing left for me?" But it was too late. The blessing had already been given and could not be reversed. Esau wept bitterly, but his fate was already sealed. His sorrow soon turned into anger, and that anger became a desire for revenge. Esau swore that he would kill Jacob as soon as their father died. Upon hearing this, Rebekah feared for her son's life and made a quick decision. He needed to flee. Thus, Jacob hurriedly departed for the land of Paddan Aram, where his uncle Laban lived. From that moment on, the brothers took opposite paths, and the distance between them was not just physical. Jacob carried with him God's promise and would become the founder of the people of Israel. Meanwhile, Esau, consumed by rage, followed his own path and formed a nation that would become a constant enemy of Israel, the Edomites. The resentment between the descendants of Jacob and Esau did not disappear over time. On the contrary, it intensified through the generations, turning into bloody conflicts. The rivalry between Israel and Edom was not just a dispute between nations, but the continuation of a family rupture that began with two brothers who never managed to reconcile. While Esau stayed behind, Jacob continued his journey. In Paddan Aram, he worked hard in the house of Laban, built his family, and prospered. Many years later, when he returned to Canaan, he was no longer the young man who had fled, but a blessed man, the leader of the people who would become Israel. And what about Esau? His path took a completely different course from Jacob's. The sorrow from his brother's betrayal never disappeared, and instead of staying in Canaan, he chose to leave. He settled in the mountains of Seir, an arid and mountainous region to the south of Israel. Although the place was difficult to inhabit, it offered security for him and his family. Esau did not go alone. He took his wives, children, servants, and a great number of flocks. As the years passed, he became a very prosperous man, accumulating wealth and influence. His descendants grew rapidly, and soon they formed a strong and independent nation. This people came to be called Edom, a name full of meaning. Edom means red, recalling both Esau's appearance at birth and the red lentil stew for which he traded his birthright. The very name of his nation carried the mark of his reckless choice and his disregard for God's blessing. The Edomites were not just shepherds and merchants, they were trained warriors. The mountainous geography of Seir gave them a natural advantage against enemy attacks, and they knew how to use it to their benefit. Moreover, Edom controlled strategic trade routes and charged tolls to those who needed to cross their lands, further increasing their power and wealth. However, despite all their prosperity, the Edomites never forgot their origins. The rivalry between Esau and Jacob spanned generations, and their descendants continued this conflict, turning it into a permanent enmity between Edom and Israel. Even though Esau had despised the blessing that rightfully belonged to him, God did not abandon him. The promise made to Rebekah was fulfilled. Both brothers became the ancestors of great nations. God granted Esau his own territory, fulfilling what had been determined. I gave Esau the mountainous region of Seir for him to possess, but Jacob and his children went down to Egypt. Joshua 24:4. Edom was a gift from God to Esau and his descendants, a land where they could prosper and settle. However, there was a fundamental difference between the paths of Esau and Jacob. While Israel received an eternal covenant with God, Edom received only land. They had wealth, military strength, and stability, but they did not have the divine promise that accompanied the descendants of Jacob. From the beginning, the relationship between Edom and Israel was marked by distrust. Although Esau and Jacob met again in peace many years later, their nations followed different paths, and the rivalry between their descendants never ceased. What started as a conflict between brothers turned into constant tension between two peoples. While the Israelites went to Egypt and grew in number there, the Edomites continued expanding their cities and strengthening their kingdom. Edom developed its own structure of rulers and became a well-organized nation. The centuries passed. The people of Israel, descendants of Jacob, multiplied in Egypt but fell under the oppression of Pharaoh and lived as slaves for 400 years. Then God raised up a deliverer, Moses. With powerful signs and extraordinary miracles, God brought the Israelites out of slavery and led them through the desert toward the land promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, on the way to the promised land, a great obstacle arose: the territory of Edom. After many years of wandering in the desert, the Israelites were exhausted and longed to reach their destination. The journey had been arduous, filled with trials and miracles. Now to move forward, they needed to cross the land of Esau's descendants. Moses, aware of the historical bond between the two peoples, decided to act with respect. He knew that Edom and Israel shared a common past, so he sought a peaceful way to continue the journey. Moses, in a gesture of respect and diplomacy, sent messengers to the king of Edom with a direct and peaceful request. "Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardships we have faced. Our ancestors went down to Egypt and stayed there for a long time, but the Egyptians oppressed us and treated us cruelly. We cried out to the Lord, and he heard our voice, sent an angel, and delivered us from Egypt. Now we are in Kadesh, on the border of your territory. We ask only that you allow us to pass through your land. We will not touch the fields nor the vineyards, nor drink the water from your wells. We will stay on the main road, without turning to the right or to the left, until we have completely crossed your domain." Numbers 20, 14, and 17. Moses made sure to remind them of the ancient connection between Israel and Edom, calling them brothers, because they descended from Jacob and Esau. His request was fair and peaceful. The Israelites would not cause harm, take anything for themselves, or interfere with Edomite land. It was a matter of necessity, not conquest. But the king of Edom's response was harsh and inflexible. "You shall not pass through here, lest I come against you with the sword." Numbers 20, 18. The Edomites refused to see Israel as a brotherly people. To them, the Israelites were nothing more than foreigners and a possible threat. The ancient rivalry between Esau and Jacob still echoed through the generations, and the resentment of the past had turned into open hostility. Even so, Moses tried again. With humility, he reinforced Israel's commitment to causing no harm, even offering to pay for anything they consumed. "If we drink your water, I and my livestock, we will pay the required price. We only want to pass through on foot, without causing any damage." Numbers 20:19. Despite the initial refusal, Moses made one more attempt. He made it clear that the Israelites had no intention of taking anything by force or settling in the land of Edom. They were even willing to pay for the water they consumed, simply to cross in peace. But Edom's response was even harsher. This time, they did not limit themselves to a simple no. They prepared for war. But he said, "You shall not pass." And Edom came out against him with many people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to let Israel pass through its territory, so Israel turned away from him. Numbers 20, 20 and 21. Edom did not just deny passage. They mobilized an entire army to prevent Israel from advancing. It was no longer merely a matter of territorial protection, but an open demonstration of hostility. They were willing to confront Israel with weapons, even knowing they were brotherly nations. Faced with this, Moses had no choice but to retreat. God did not allow Israel to fight Edom at that moment, so the people had to take a much longer route, detouring through the desert. The journey, which was already difficult, became even more exhausting. This episode definitively marked the relationship between Israel and Edom. It became evident that Edom did not see Israel as an ally, but as an enemy. Esau's resentment toward Jacob still burned among his descendants, and the Edomites preferred to see Israel wandering in the desert rather than help them in any way. By rejecting passage, Edom set itself against God's plans. Israel was not just a people searching for a home. They were the chosen nation, and every obstacle in their path was also a challenge to divine will. But this hostility would not end there. Throughout history, the Edomites would continue to oppose Israel, and God's prophets would bring severe judgments against them for their cruel attitude. The resentment that began in Rebekah's womb would not be forgotten, and Edom's betrayal would be recorded forever. The rivalry between Israel and Edom did not end with the Israelites' journey through the desert. On the contrary, it deepened and became even more bitter over the centuries. The Edomites never forgot their hostility toward Israel, and whenever an opportunity arose, they demonstrated their opposition. When Joshua led the Israelites in the conquest of the Promised Land, Edom remained an independent nation, protected by its fortified mountains. However, this independence did not mean peace. Although smaller in size and power, Edom remained ever vigilant, ready to resist or attack Israel whenever it deemed convenient. During the time of the Judges, Israel faced countless enemies such as the Canaanites, Moabites, Philistines, and Ammonites, and despite their blood connection to Israel, Edom did not hesitate to join these peoples in harming their former relatives whenever possible. But it was during the period of the kings that the conflict between Edom and Israel intensified even more. During the reign of Saul, the first king of Israel, Edom positioned itself as a declared enemy. While Saul struggled to establish his government and face external threats, the Edomites were among those who constantly attacked and threatened Israelite borders. In the time of King David, the rivalry reached its peak. David, known for his military skills, did not tolerate the Edomite attacks. He gathered his army and marched against Edom, conquering the nation with a decisive victory. His campaign was so devastating that he established military garrisons in Edom and subjected its inhabitants to Israel's rule, 2 Samuel 8:13 and 14. During this period, Edom lived under Israel's control, further deepening the resentment of its people. When Solomon took the throne, Edom attempted to free itself but failed. The king kept the nation under control, ensuring that his influence remained strong. However, after Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel split into two: the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. Seeing the weakness caused by this division, Edom saw an opportunity and rebelled again, seeking to regain its independence. During the reign of Jehoram, Edom finally managed to break free from Israel's rule and became an independent nation, 2 Kings 8:20 and 22. However, this independence did not bring peace. On the contrary, whenever Israel or Judah faced moments of weakness, Edom took advantage of the situation to attack or ally itself with the enemies of its former rulers. Conflicts between these peoples were already frequent and violent, but the worst was yet to come. In the days of the prophet Jeremiah, Judah, the southern kingdom, was experiencing a period of great instability. The Babylonian Empire, under the command of Nebuchadnezzar, was becoming increasingly powerful and threatening. The prophets warned that God would bring judgment upon Judah because of the people's sins, but many refused to listen. Then, the prophecy was fulfilled. Nebuchadnezzar surrounded Jerusalem and, after a long and brutal attack, completely destroyed the city. Solomon's temple was burned, the walls were torn down, and thousands of Jews were captured and taken as prisoners to Babylon. But in the midst of this tragedy, Edom took an unforgivable action. Instead of showing compassion for their relatives, the Edomites rejoiced over the fall of Jerusalem. They mocked the defeated Jews, celebrated their destruction, and even joined the Babylonians in looting the city. As if that were not enough, they captured those who tried to escape and handed them over to their enemies, demonstrating cold and calculated cruelty. This act of betrayal sealed Edom's fate. The resentment that had existed since the days of Esau and Jacob had now become an unforgivable crime in the eyes of God. But God would not ignore this injustice. Through the prophets, he announced a severe judgment against Edom, ensuring that its wickedness would not go unpunished. Obadiah, despite being one of the shortest books of the Bible, its message is powerful and direct: the condemnation of Edom. God declared that because of the violence committed against Israel, Edom would face a tragic fate. Because of the violence against your brother Jacob, shame will cover you, and you will be destroyed forever. Obadiah 1:10. The prophet announced that on the day of judgment, Edom would not only be humiliated, but would cease to exist as a nation. The prophet Jeremiah also prophesied Edom's downfall, making it clear that its end would be a cause of astonishment for all who witnessed its destruction. Edom will become a desolation. Everyone who passes by will be appalled and will hiss because of all its plagues. Jeremiah 49:17. The prophet Isaiah reinforced this judgment, declaring that Edom's land would become a barren desert, a symbol of God's wrath. Its streams will be turned into pitch and its dust into sulfur. Its land will become burning pitch. Isaiah 34:9. These words were not just metaphors or empty threats. They were fulfilled throughout history. Edom's fate was sealed. This people, who rejected their spiritual heritage and chose to be enemies of Israel, would not escape divine judgment. Over time, Edom gradually weakened, losing its military strength and strategic position. Its mountain fortresses, which once seemed impregnable, were not enough to prevent its downfall. The punishment came in various forms. The once fertile and commercially valuable land began to be taken over by other peoples. The Edomites suffered repeated defeats until their identity as a nation completely disappeared, exactly as God had prophesied through Obadiah, Jeremiah, and Isaiah. At the height of its power, Edom made a fatal mistake. It betrayed Jerusalem and helped the Babylonians destroy Solomon's temple. But what the Edomites failed to realize was that the same empire to whom they extended their hand would one day turn against them. A few years after the fall of Judah, Babylon turned its fury against Edom. Its cities were devastated, its armies weakened, and the nation that was once known for its military strength began to crumble before the Babylonian war machine. The Edomites tried to resist, relying on their natural mountain fortresses, but even their strategic terrain was not enough to protect them from the most powerful empire of the time. The destruction was relentless and marked the beginning of the end for Edom. But if the Babylonian invasion had already been a severe blow, a new enemy would arise to completely annihilate its rule: the Nabateans. The Nabateans, an Arab people known for their skill in trade and adaptation to the desert, began to expand. Taking advantage of Edom's weakness, they gradually took over its lands, driving out the remaining Edomites and assuming control of the region. Edom could not resist. Among the lost fortresses was possibly Petra, the city that would later become one of the most important commercial centers of the Nabateans. What remained of the Edomites fled to the southern region of Judea, where they came to be known as Idumeans. Without their own territory, their identity as an independent nation began to fade as they merged with other peoples. The Idumeans continued to live in areas near Israel, but in the 2nd century before Christ, their fate was permanently sealed. John Hyrcanus, the high priest of the Hasmonean dynasty, launched an offensive against them and imposed a choice: forced conversion to Judaism or death. Those who wanted to survive had to follow Jewish laws, including circumcision. This was the final blow in the assimilation of Esau's descendants, who completely lost their identity as a distinct people. It was in this context that Herod the Great emerged, an Idumean who, under Roman rule, managed to rise to power. In an ironic twist of fate, a descendant of Esau would become king over the descendants of Jacob, but only while ruling under the authority of a foreign empire. The name Herod became a symbol of cruelty and betrayal. A descendant of the Idumeans, he ascended to the throne of the Jews, but he was never accepted as a legitimate king by Israel. His reign reflected the arrogance and brutality inherited from his ancestors, the Edomites. It was Herod who ordered the massacre of the infants in Bethlehem, in a desperate attempt to eliminate Jesus, the true king of the Jews. Consumed by fear of losing power, he did not hesitate to resort to extreme violence to eliminate any threat to his throne. The irony of this story is striking. A descendant of Esau once again tried to exterminate the lineage of Jacob, but failed. While the descendants of Jacob, the people of Israel, survived and remained throughout history, the Edomites disappeared completely. The prophecies were fulfilled exactly as God had declared. Edom could have chosen a different path. It could have recognized Israel as a brother nation and sought peace. However, from the days of Esau, his descendants chose a path of pride, rebellion, and enmity against God. The result? Total disappearance as a nation. For the day of the Lord is near upon all nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your wickedness shall fall upon your own head. Obadiah 1:15. The ancient kingdom of Edom became a symbol of divine judgment. Its name was erased from history, while Israel, despite facing persecutions and exiles, remained steadfast until this day. The conflict that began between two brothers ended with one being completely erased and the other preserved by God's promise. This is the tragic story of the Edomites, a people who could have been allies of Israel, but chose the path of hostility and paid the price for it. Now, tell us in the comments, did you already know the story of the Edomites in the Bible? Share this teaching so that more people may be strengthened. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. May God bless your life.